I'm Cathy Blanford. Greg was my friend. We also worked together some. It's so difficult to really take in the fact that we're here today because Greg is no longer with us. His was such a dynamic, alive presence that he would literally fill up a room. He's gone, and yet I still feel that he's here with us. There's a line in a song that we sing frequently here that reminds me so strongly of Greg. It goes, "And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find." Greg brought hope. He brought it to me in an intensive care unit waiting room where we first met. He was there to support a friend of his who had AIDS, and I was there with my very sick husband. As you all know, no one was ever a stranger to Greg, and he struck up a conversation with me. Before long, he was giving me a hug, and his lighthearted touch was just exactly the hope that I needed in that very difficult time. Greg brought hope. He brought it to his friends who always knew that they could count on him to be there when they needed a hand. Greg would be there often with a thoughtful gift, with a genuine concern, and always with a story. I loved it when he would pull out that little spiral notebook out of his pocket. And he always kept it handy there because he wanted to write down things that he heard or saw, but he would pull it out to share a funny story or to tell us about a license plate that he had seen or an interesting sign that he had read somewhere. Greg just could always make us smile. Greg brought hope. He brought it to the children and parents and staff of the Positive Care Program, a program for HIV-positive children where I was working in the middle of the AIDS crisis. When I needed someone to educate and entertain these families at our retreats, I would call on Greg. And he would come with his humor, yes, but even more importantly, with his very sensitive nature and his sincere empathy. Everyone, adults and children alike, were touched. Greg brought hope. He brought it to the hospice nurse who, years after hearing Greg speak, did not remember his name, but did remember what he had taught her about what to say when somebody says, "How are you feeling? How are you today?" when you're really feeling rotten. Do you know about that? He taught people that when you say fine, what you're really often meaning, the letters F-I-N-E, are frustrated, irritated, neurotic, and exhausted. And he taught people instead to use a grading system where A+ would be feeling just as good as you possibly could feel, and C would be average, etc. And to use that as an honest alternative to saying, "I feel fine." And so this hospice nurse was able to let a coworker know how she was really feeling on a down day. She was able to remember how to get the support that she had needed because she'd heard Greg speak a number of years before. Greg brought hope. He brought it to literally hundreds of thousands of people across this land and in other lands as well, in the talks that he would give. I was present at many of these talks, and I never grew tired of hearing Greg's stories. But mostly, I loved to watch him work the crowd. Before a presentation, he would arrive early. He used to have to set up his overheads. I think it was just a couple years ago he started using a computer. So he'd have to set it up, and then after he'd done that, he would begin to greet all the people that were coming in to hear his presentation. And he would work hard to find people's names, to hear their stories, to really get to know the people that he was going to speak to. This is actually what Greg was doing in Virginia just very shortly before he died. He would pass out hug buttons, and he would have people smiling long before they actually sat down to his presentation. It was just a joy to watch. Greg can still bring us hope. In spite of his too sudden and much too early death, the memory of Greg, of his lightheartedness in the face of difficulty, of his very sensitive and caring nature, sometimes disguised by his jokes, that memory will continue to bring a smile to our faces when life is hard. Greg's sudden passing brought clear to me the fact that none of us knows how much time we have. Now is the only moment that we can be sure of. In the last few weeks, I have found myself reaching out to those that I love and letting them know what they mean to me. More than usual, I have been grateful for the glory of each moment, the reflection of the Christmas tree lights in the eyes of my grandchildren, the birds at the bird feeder, the cold, crisp air that strikes my face when I go for a walk in the morning, the privilege of being with family and friends, something that Greg loves so much. Thank you, Greg, for this final gift, for hugs and humor and hope. Hope that each moment of life is worth living to the fullest. I love you, Greg. And I love you, Madeline.
Let me get my notes out. No, I could never really read those. I've been finding I've had a hard time knowing where to begin trying to talk about Greg to people since he died. There was so much about him that I truly valued. I just never knew where to start. It's also hard to speak in the past about someone who still feels so present. But I can tell you this, he would have been very happy with the snacks we're having later. My wife Mary and I met him and Madeline when our West Suburban Chalice Circle formed 10 years ago. They were not yet members of this congregation, but they had attended the Unitarian Universalist Summer Assembly in Lake Geneva for many years. Shortly after joining the Chalice Circle, Madeline and Greg also joined the congregation. In our first Chalice Circle meeting, I was immediately drawn to Greg's quick wit and wry humor, and touched by his tenderness and emotional authenticity. It was evident that Greg had a wealth of stories from his travels and his work. And when I say travels, I include his trips to Jewel and the post office. It was equally clear how much he treasured the stories of each person he met. On a personal level, Greg was my closest friend, something that didn't really sink in until a day or so after his death, because I hadn't had a closest friend like him for most of my adult life. I suppose that for both of us, it was like having a brother that neither of us grew up with, one with whom we got along. We also shared several men's retreats and a men's group for almost 7 years, carpooling whenever possible. Greg and I were at our worship services here so often without our spouses that I imagined visitors and new members figured we were a couple. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Because both of our work schedules were irregular and we lived so close to each other, we often had coffee together and confided in each other. We looked for opportunities to get together, such as movies, dinners, folk music concerts, and weekly Downton Abbey watching and debriefing. Greg was an adopted uncle to our children, Kayla and Matthew, and he always treated them like family, at times better. He was sure to deliver This
is just a little of Greg's humor.
Yeah.
He's getting you back for bringing.
Yeah, he is. Yes, I know. I'll get you. For 30 years, Greg was a motivational speaker, as you've heard. His specialty was hugs, humor, and hope. His business card credentials were MSW, Masters of Social Work, CSP, Certified Speaking Professionals, and PFG, Pretty Funny Guy. No one I know espoused the need for laughter more than he did. To know his roots is to understand what a long journey he made to get there. Greg proposed that everyone needs 25 good laughs a day to stay healthy, and that was before science began documenting the health benefits of laughter. He was sure to deliver at least that many during his presentations. I videotaped a couple of his talks and edited revisions to his demo tape, and it was a pleasure to watch him work. His presentations were interactive and no one was safe. It was usually the people in front, however, who participated by responding to his questions and helping him demonstrate the 7 types of hugs. His gentle humor always broke the ice. Through his talks, Greg was able to do the thing he loved most in life, connect with others in a meaningful way. He needed to do this, and he wasn't happy if he wasn't connecting. As Cathy mentioned, over his career, he touched hundreds of thousands of people on a personal, emotional level. He could have a ballroom full of farmers or insurance actuaries hugging. As you might have seen in the slideshow, Greg had been on TV and radio. His books were endorsed by top sociologists and psychologists. And Madeline has drawers full of letters from audience members who expressed how he impacted them profoundly in just 60 or 90 minutes. And you'll hear a few of them later. But he always wanted to hear your story, and your story, and your story. Greg used his non-threatening humor as a means of connecting with people in his non-professional life as well, and this is one reason we had so much fun together. Like no one else in my life, he could persuade me to join him in activities that I'd never do myself. About 5 years ago, during the summer when some of our worship services are lay-led, Greg gave a service, during part of which, the humor part, he wore a red foam rubber nose like this. And the slideshow has a photo from that day. On one beautiful day the following week, he thought it would be fun for the two of us to put on our noses and walk into his bank in downtown Elmhurst. After agreeing that maybe that wouldn't be the kind of attention we wanted to attract, we decided to shift the venue to Starbucks alfresco area. We both enjoyed the smiles from passersby and didn't believe we had lost Starbucks any customers that day. The sermons here this month have been exploring what it means to have a sense of wonder. Greg was full of wonder, and I loved that part of him that was so in touch with his inner child. It's a challenge for us adults to honor and express that, because sometimes it means being willing to appear silly and immature, like wearing a clown nose in public when you're not on your way to a birthday party. Greg's sense of wonder, I believe, was also revealed in his love of the choir here at Unity Temple. He was deeply moved by the beauty of many of Marty Swisher's music selections and our choir's powerful performances of them. And he loved sharing our choir with others. When they performed a best of concert, Greg enlisted our friend Corey Anderson to videotape it with him and me to edit it so that it could be posted to YouTube. I was happy to share that sense of wonder with him. I've strived to be more like Greg ever since our first Chalice Circle meeting. Just by being himself, he brought out my inner extrovert and helped me see what rewards can come to me and to others from extending myself, often in a humorous way, more than I might be comfortable with. His favorite quote and one with which he ended his talks was by Leo Roston. It's on the back page of your program and also on the yellow hope cards you received when you entered. But I'd like to read it for you. I cannot believe that the purpose of life is simply to be happy. I believe that the purpose of life is to be useful, to be responsible, to be compassionate. It is, above all, to matter, to count, to stand for something, to have made some difference that you lived at all. This was like a mission statement for Greg, and he lived it every day. No one I know spread more love, kindness, and compassion. He was entertaining, touching, instructive, insightful, challenging, very generous, and of course, funny. He was a gift the world has lost and can hardly afford to be without.